While literally millions of people have taken to the streets to protest this fascism, there is an urgent need for many more, for all those who have every reason to oppose this fascism, to actively join in the struggle to defeat this fascism. Everyone who wants to see an end to oppression based on race, sex, and gender, and an end to cruel, murderous oppression and lawless tyranny overall, needs to be actively involved now and in an ongoing way in the massive movement that is urgently needed to defeat this Trump MAGA fascism, to create the conditions in the country where this fascist regime cannot govern, cannot remain in power, and cannot carry out the even worse horrors it is moving to violently enforce.
Hello and welcome to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. This is our 251st episode, and today is Thursday, June 5th. My name is Annie Day, and at the top of the show, you heard the voice of the revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian, talking about what's needed in the life and death battle to defeat Trump MAGA fascism. I am thrilled to be joined today by Michelle Xai from the RevCom Corps for the Emancipation of Humanity.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here today, and welcome to the Revolution Nothing Less show. This show is about a real revolution to overthrow this whole system of capitalism, imperialism. And we base ourselves on the new communism that has been developed by the revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian, who you'll get a chance to hear from and watch in today's episode.
So, Michelle, the big topic of today's show, or one of the main topics, is this vicious assault of these immigration raids that have ramped up all across the country. ICE rampaging at the courthouses, in neighborhoods and communities in full battle gear, just snatching away mothers from their children, kids out of high school. It's been a horror.
Yeah, and the other side of things is also that people have risen up in the face of that.
That's right.
They've gone up right in the face of these modern day Gestapo, people that are going after terrorizing children, families, but people are courageously standing up against this. And it's beautiful, and it needs to be strengthened and spread all across society.
Yeah, and one of the other things we're going to hit at is the beauty that we're seeing in these spontaneous outpourings. Shows the potential of what's needed to actually drive the whole regime from power if it gets linked up with the mass demand that the Trump fascist regime must go now. Soon, we're going to bring you an interview from the streets of San Diego, where some of the spontaneous resistance took place. And we're also going to hear from an immigration attorney that's linking, that in his own work is linking the fight to defend immigrants with the fight to defeat Trump MAGA fascism. But to give us an overview to start, we're going to watch a video from Rafael Kadaris, also from the RevCom Corps for the Emancipation of Humanity, who gives a sense of what's happened this week.
All over the country right now, the fascist Trump regime is escalating their terror against immigrants. Kidnapping people at courthouses when they come for routine immigration hearings.
Yanet Correa screams injustice after her husband was placed on an expedited deportation order after showing up to his immigration check-in in Miami.
Ripping apart families.
Crying out, "I don't want to die in Honduras," an emotional mother taken by ICE agents at immigration court Thursday.
Targeting people at construction sites.
A major immigration raid in Tallahassee today. They arrested over 100 people at a construction site in Collegetown.
At restaurants.
ICE has just raided a San Diego Italian restaurant.
I'm just thinking about my coworkers, and I'm thinking about their families.
These are not criminals. These are human beings trying to survive and feed their families.
They are hunting us down like animals and are You're okay with this?
So I want to give a shout out to all the people all across the country right now who are putting their bodies on the line to stop this. In Phoenix, San Diego, New York City.
About 24 protesters taken into custody for charges that include obstruction of government administration.
But much more is needed. Flood the courthouses where these ICE predators are stalking immigrants. Do not let them come for your neighbors and coworkers. Defend the rights and lives of immigrants. Demand the whole fascist Trump regime must go now. Because unless and until this regime is removed from power, all this will keep going on and getting worse.
Trump must go now! Trump must go now! Trump must go now!
Listen to these powerful words from the revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian.
There is plenty that needs to be done, and urgently, which requires real boldness and heart to stand up against the fascists and any other oppressive force in their moves to threaten and intimidate, brutalize, and even murder people. Let me make clear that I am not calling for launching unprovoked and unjustified attacks on anybody. But there is a right and a need, and there is the responsibility to defend the people who are oppressed and brutalized under this system, and those who represent and stand for what is right and are being attacked because of that.
I mean, it's true what Rafael said in there, that this is, people have been standing up against these raids all across the country. We want to show a couple more examples of this. Just this week in Milford, Massachusetts, a high school junior was abducted by ICE on his way to volleyball practice. But in response, the high school students, his fellow students, on the day of their graduation, they marched in protest.
Today's rally was organized after the town says a high schooler was detained by ICE on Saturday. His family identifies him as Marcelo Gomez.
Free Marcelo!
Free Marcelo is the chant at Milford Town Hall.
Free Marcelo!
More than 500 people came to rally for the release of 18-year-old Marcelo Gomez. People in the car say the Milford High School junior was detained by ICE agents on his way to volleyball practice Saturday morning.
I was also being interrogated by ICE officers.
Iago Sampaio told us he was in the same car as Marcelo.
If I was a year older, I would have been in the back of the car with my friend.
Gomez's family says he came to the U.S. from Brazil at age 5 and settled in Milford. Relatives say Marcelo was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
They're not waiting for him.
Yeah?
No, they're looking for somebody else.
I don't see how a kid en route to volleyball practice who's an honors student, who's a musician in the high school band, that kid's not a threat to law and order.
Marcelo was supposed to play in the Milford High band at graduation Sunday. After getting their diplomas, Milford High graduates marched to the rally for Marcelo.
It's absolutely incredible that the community can come together like this. He's an amazing person and he deserves the world, and this is it.
He's like a brother to me, and this is so disappointing that I have to see this happen for him to get out. He's a great human being. He never did anything, so I don't understand why we're going through all this, especially on a day like this where we graduated.
On Tuesday in Minneapolis, fascist federal thugs raided a Mexican restaurant, and the community poured out and said no. One person that witnessed this said, "I don't think they realized the community would respond so quick and kind of create a human barrier." Let's watch.
Those videos are so inspiring and powerful to watch, the defiance from people, and tells us a lot about the potential to be drawn forward. But before we go on, I want to bring in one other aspect of these attacks that are coming down from the Trump fascist regime in relationship to their overall assault on immigration is they're going after viciously any judge, mayors, congresspeople who either speak out in protest or are, ruling against them. And it tells us a great deal about the determination of this fascism and the danger of it. One example is in Nashville. The Democratic mayor spoke out against a whole series of ICE raids that had been going on. Like they arrested 500 immigrants, and they said these were all criminals. And when the Democratic mayor said, well, show us your evidence, they said, well, we don't have any proof. But in response to this, just the slightest bit of protest from the Democratic mayor, the fascist Congressman Andy Ogles said this. He said, quote, if you're helping violent gangs destroy Tennessee by obstructing ICE, then you belong behind bars. Think about that. This mayor spoke out in protest and questioned the lies from ICE and from the fascists, and the congressman threatened the mayor with prison.
Due to the remarks of Freddie O'Connell and the potential for aiding and abetting illegal immigration, the Homeland Security and the Judiciary Committees will be conducting an investigation into the mayor of Nashville.
And you just have to deal with and confront, if they are doing this, if they are threatening this to their counterparts among the rulers of this system, mayors, congresspeople, all of this, then what does that mean they intend to do to the masses of people? And this is where this has to be stopped now. This defiance in the streets that we're seeing all across the country, it has to get linked to the mass demand that the whole fascist regime must go now. And you see, a lot of people, when we talk about the need to drive this regime out, they sort of say, well, I don't know where the people are who would do that. They're right there. They're looking at us in the streets of Minneapolis and Phoenix and all over.
Yeah, that's right. And the RevCom Corps has been uniting very broadly and actually standing up and defending people, and defending the rights and lives of people that are under attack by this fascist regime. And the way we just watched that video of the woman in Minneapolis, right, that she got shoved and then she got right back up and was like, no, she was not deterred, she was not provoked, but she did not back down. Yeah. And this is actually what we need in society, that bold and courageous, recognizing that this is completely outrageous and illegitimate and nobody should tolerate that. The fact that they're terrorizing people and that they're going after people, and the RevCom Corps for the Emancipation of Humanity, we've been training, we've been getting out there defending people, and we're acting on what is put forward in our declaration. We need and we demand a whole new way to live, a fundamentally different system, which says so long as we are still living under the rule of this system of capitalism, imperialism, we will defend people against attacks on their lives and on the rights that are supposed to be guaranteed under the U.S. Constitution. But we need a whole different system with a whole different constitution. The Constitution for the new Socialist Republic in North America, which will provide much greater rights for the people, including the basic right to have the fundamentally determining role in a new society and government whose purpose and goal is to eliminate all exploitation and oppression everywhere, lifting people's sights to what's actually possible and actually, uniting with people that right now are very courageously standing up and saying, no, we're not going to let you just abduct our immigrant brothers and sisters.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we're raising people's sights while we're standing together to unite all who can be united to defeat this fascism. And this is where we want to bring in for a minute the importance of the protest taking place on June 14th. We talked about this a lot last week. That is the occasion of Trump's military parade in D.C. And there are protests being called by a range of organizations all across the country. And Refuse Fascism is calling for protests in the streets of D.C. to oppose this military parade. Basically, it's the 250th anniversary of the Army, and it's Trump's birthday. And there's going to be thousands of soldiers and tanks and helicopters in the streets, and it must be opposed. So Refuse Fascism is calling for a protest at 1 p.m. at Logan Circle, and they're going to march to the White House under the banner that the Trump fascist regime must go now, that Trump's military parade must be opposed in D.C. and all across the country.
I just want to speak to this because, we've been hearing people around the RevCom Corps, kind of saying about this military parade that, saying things like, well, this is just Trump having a ego trip, right? Or that this is just a bad waste of our tax dollars, right? But that's downplaying and really not actually grasping the danger of what this represents, right? This fascist leap, right? I mean, think about it. You have a military that, as bad as it is, it serves an imperialist system, but in what I just read from our declaration, you have a society that actually has a constitution where you have rights, where you have laws, right? And that and you're supposed to be beholden to that, right? And if you don't, you have different institutions like courts and judges and et cetera, that enforce that, right? What does it mean when he forges a military that is not beholden to those laws and says, I am the law, and says, you are beholden to me, and what I say is the law? That's fascism. That's dangerous. That is going from one form of rule to a fascist form of rule. This is the danger of what this military parade represents. And this is why it has to be opposed in the streets, raising this demand that the Trump fascist regime must go now.
Yeah, I mean, it's heavy because it is look, we know that they violate their own rules and laws all the time. But then to just tear the mask off, to do that openly, to say, well, there's no, where Trump, like you're saying, is the law and above the law, and you, the military, serve what I say. It means, whereas 4 years ago, when Trump tried to get the army to go shoot protesters in the streets and he was stopped, now what Trump is trying to do is completely eviscerate any of those blocks and yes, all out fascist rule. So it does have to be opposed. And I want to bring in here, there was an important essay in The Guardian by this woman, Judith Levine, who's a writer. And the title of her article is "We're Minimizing the Horror of Trump's Military Birthday Parade." And she made the point, she ended the essay, the article, with this. She said, "The Army's Golden Knights parachute team will land on the ellipse and hand the president a flag. Officials say there are no plans to sing happy birthday, but there are rumors the Army will also give Trump a birthday gift. Let's call June 14th what it promises to be: the ceremonial birth of the U.S.'s 21st century fascist regime." And it's with those stakes and that seriousness that people have to be in the streets all across the country and in D.C. We cannot cede the Capitol on the day that this monstrosity is going to march through those streets. It has to be, Refuse Fascism is calling a bold and serious protest, nonviolent, permitted, but bold and determined. So if you're anywhere near D.C., you should get there, and anywhere else across the country, be in the streets, raise this demand. The Trump fascist regime must go now. We cannot allow it to consolidate in the way you're talking about. So we want to move now to two interviews we're going to play back to back. First, an interview that Sunsara Taylor, our co-host, did with the immigration attorney Alfonso Morales. And then we're going to go to a segment from the streets of San Diego. Luna with the RevCom Corps for the Emancipation of Humanity in Los Angeles. She went down to, where these protests happened, this immigration raid, and people spontaneously standing up against it. And she interviewed a community advocate, Kat Blue, and Pedro Rios, who's the director of the American Friends Service Committee, the U.S.-Mexico border program. And he was on the ground when this attack happened. So we're going to play those interviews back to back.
Alfonso Morales is a immigration attorney. He has spent years fighting to keep families together. He is a member of his local school board, and he has been actively outspoken against the escalating attacks of the Trump fascist regime. Alfonso, welcome to the Revolution Nothing Less show.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Well, I want to start with just the emergency situation we are in. Obviously, there have been decades and years of immigrants, undocumented, forced to live in the shadows, attacks on their rights, but we are in a moment of escalating attack. And I wonder if you could capture what you think the dimensions of this are as you're confronting it as an attorney.
Well, I mean, it's catastrophic. One of the things that is occurring right now and just really started happening the last 2 weeks are the detentions at the courthouses, right? So some people are showing up to court and their cases are being dismissed and they're immediately being arrested. The issue there is that if you don't go to court, you're going to get deported and it's almost impossible to reopen your case. But then people say, well, do I go to court because I'm probably going to be detained? And, very related to the mission of Refuse Fascism, what's going on is people are being swept off the streets by plainclothes officers who are not identifying themselves, people who wear masks, who are in the shadows, who we wonder who they are. And this is what you're seeing across the country right now. And it's getting to the point where people are waking up into this new reality, into this new nightmare. And this is what you're seeing happening in these different cities, that people are starting to rise up and say, no, stop. You're not taking my neighbor. You're not taking, the guy that I know from the restaurant, because we don't know who you are and who are you. And as soon as they start recording them, they shut down and they say, we're federal police. We don't have to answer that question. And of course you do. Forever we've been told, you can ask an officer to identify themselves, give me your badge number or something to that extent. If not, then who are these people? Where are we living? Is this America or is this not America? And I think we're starting to live in fear. And it's something that is important that we recognize, because it's not only going to apply to people that are immigrants, it's going to apply to citizens. We are having situations that are people of color, that are United States citizens born here, are being taken, and we don't even know where they go. They take them away for 5-6 hours, a day. The young man in Florida who was arrested and taken before a magistrate, and even though they provided his U.S. birth certificate, they said, well, we can't do anything because there's an ICE hold and that's federal. So unfortunately, we have to hold you. And they kept him detained. And he was detained for over 36 hours as a U.S. citizen. I mean, these are the protections that the Constitution is supposed to give us and grant us. And it's chilling to think that just because the administration has taken the position that they want to change the Constitution, that they're not going to follow the law. And that's what they've said to the Supreme Court. We disagree with it. Therefore, we're attempting to change that.
When I first heard you speak out against Trump's attack on birthright citizenship, which is built into the Constitution at this point, you drew a very strong analogy to Nazi Germany and what was done to the demonization and of Jewish people then as a spear point of criminalizing all sections of society. And I wonder if you want to speak a little bit about how you see the parallel with what's being done to immigrants here in this country at this time.
Sometimes people tend to forget the past, in large part because we weren't there. And what happened was, when Hitler came to power, he came to power with this ideology and this platform that the white race was superior. And he had to demonize somebody, which he decided to demonize the Jews. And in this situation, we're demonizing immigrants. But the problem is that it doesn't end there. It starts there. And then some people might be able to get behind that. It's even really crazy, because what happens is, and you saw it back then, some Jews supported Hitler, and you have Latinos who support Trump. And what's going on is they don't understand that they're next, and they're in line as well.
Is there anything else that you want to shine a light on that you think people need to understand, not just both for immigrants to know their rights, but also for the broader public to understand the level of attack and terror that's being carried out right now?
Well, I just think it's important that people understand the magnitude of this. This isn't just an immigration issue. It's not an issue regarding immigrants exclusively. The problem and the chilling effect that this should have on everyone is that it's our due process rights, our constitutional rights that are being violated. And it can be any sector. Someone said the other day, I forgot where I heard this, but they said, imagine if the Democrats were in office and they said, we're going to get rid of the Second Amendment. And we're just going to get rid of it. We're not going to vote on it. We're not going to go through the whole channels. We're just going to say, You can't have your guns anymore. People would be up in arms, the Second Amendment people. So this is what's happening. They're changing what they want with the stroke of a pen. There's so much footage of Trump saying he hates executive orders, that executive orders is not the way to do things. And now it's like his first term, and they have like a stack of executive orders for him to sign, and they're just gonna go and see who's gonna stop them. And it's shocking to see that they're saying, because there's video of Vance, the vice president, saying, Mr. President, just do what you want. If the Supreme Court rules against you, let's see how they stop you.
Yeah, that's very heavy. I think people need to take that in. That's an extremely heavy statement because the Supreme Court does not have a military, and Trump does. Trump has law enforcement, he has military, and he's been purging the military. He's getting ready for his big military parade to display his new stripped down, even more hardcore fascist chain of command and all of this in Washington, D.C. coming up on June 14th. So, yeah, you want to say something?
To educate the people a little bit more,
Yeah.
if the Supreme Court issues an order and it's violated, they then direct the U.S. Marshals to go enforce it. But the U.S. Marshal's office is under the Department of Justice, which is under the president. And how are you going to enforce anything then if it's against the president's attorneys and it's the U.S. Marshals who's under the president who's supposed to help enforce it? Because we're basically having attorneys in front of the Supreme Court defying the direct orders of the Supreme Court. And I never thought we would see a day where that would happen. Talk about not having any respect for the law. But that's exactly what this presidency is doing. And it's exactly why we need to do something now. And we need to protect our Constitution.
And what do you think about the role of people, regular people? You talked a little bit. We saw people coming out in Minneapolis, down in San Diego, standing up against some of these ICE agents carrying out raids and terror. What is your challenge to people in this country who are watching this and feel that it's wrong?
It's going to take ordinary people to do extraordinary things in order to rectify what's going on. We can't wait. The best time to stop a movement like this is at the very beginning. And people, if you see something, say something, because we already know what's happening. We already know what's going on. Instead of them taking people and kidnapping them and putting on trains like they did in Nazi Germany, they're putting them on planes. And it's starting to look a lot like a lynch mob. It's starting to look a lot like Jim Crow days, where they're going out there in groups and gathering as many illegals as they can. And, what you do is you use terms like illegals. You use terms like criminals in order to dehumanize the situation. But this is definitely a humanitarian type of crisis. And we need to appeal to the humanity of everyone, because what's going on to mothers, to fathers, to brothers and sisters, it's not right.
And what about the fact that like a judge was arrested, Mayor Ras Baraka was arrested, then now a congresswoman has been charged? What about the fact that there's threats being issued against politicians in sanctuary cities? This is a different level of not just coming after the immigrants directly who are being demonized and targeted, but anybody who would stand up for them.
It causes a chilling effect, right? Because then people don't want to stand up and do what's right. The judge that was arrested because she refused to adhere to a warrant that was not issued by a magistrate, but it was a ICE warrant, a detainer that really does not have any judicial effect or power. And because she did not turn over the person who was in her courtroom that day, they felt that she was obstructing justice. And by arresting her, I believe the message is, if you stand against us, you're going to jail. I mean, this is the parallel that we have with Nazi Germany. You start to get rid of your political adversaries or foes, as you see it, so that you eliminate them. But there's much more. There are many more people that believe in justice and so forth. But the problem is that if we're disfranchised, if we're not together, if we don't say, hey, we got to do something now, if we keep waiting for someone else to do it, we're going to miss our opportunity.
And do you want to make any comment about the demand that the Trump regime needs to go now versus waiting for 2026, 2028, some future election?
It has to go now, because if it doesn't, we're not going to be around in 2026. Nazi Germany was taken over in 68. That's how in 68 days. That's how it came into fruition. Could you imagine if he suspends the Constitution or suspends Congress because of some kind of martial law that he wants to declare? Then it's going to be too late. So we need to do something now. I mean, you never stop fighting. I remember my grandparents, both of them, they always would tell me, the last thing you lose is hope. But the thing is, we need to start now. We cannot wait. We see the writing. We see the injustices occurring. And as Dr. Martin Luther King used to say, injustice somewhere is an injustice everywhere. So we cannot wait. We have to see the situation for what it is, which is urgent, which is a desperate situation. Could you imagine being a person who has no criminal history, who's never been in jail, being taken off the street, put in chains, put into a jail, and treated like a criminal, and you've never done anything wrong except exist in a place where they don't want you?
Alfonso Morales, I want to really thank you for the work that you're doing. I want to thank you for speaking out, and I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us here on the Revolution Nothing Less show.
Sarah, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Normally on a Friday evening, this restaurant behind me would be packed with customers, but today it was forced to shut down after chaos unfolded during an operation by federal authorities. Now, employees I spoke with told me that they detained several workers. Right now, we're working to confirm the exact number.
This was the chaotic scene of an operation by Homeland Security investigations as they swept through this restaurant at the corner of Beach and 30th Street. Heavily armed agents can be seen in full tactical gear as cars block the streets off. In this video, you can hear loud booms and sirens as community members surrounded their cars. Pedro Rios with American Friends Service Committee was there and watched as people were taken away in handcuffs.
The agents fired sound grenades, flashbang grenades at the crowd.
Claire Cody works at Buena Forchetta. She had just clocked in for her shift at about 4:30 Friday afternoon when she says several men in trucks went inside saying they had a search warrant. Claire says agents put employees in handcuffs to check their ID.
There was no stopping them. There was like 30 ICE. There was 30 of them. I mean, we were just all in shock. They just came at a time where it was so unexpected.
Before the restaurant opened up for dinner, staff put up this close sign. Claire says employees here are all like a big family and they're heartbroken.
They took people. They took some of our employees.
Immigrants, not hate. That's what makes America great.
Meanwhile, outside the restaurant, the community pushed back.
It was quite clear that there was just a complete rejection by the community of the federal agents of conducting this in their community and neighborhood.
My name is Luna. I'm with the RevCom Corps in Los Angeles, and we are here with Pedro Rios, who serves as a director of the American Friends Service Committee's U.S.-Mexico border program in San Diego. You were down on the ground on Friday, May 29th in South Park in San Diego when a very terroristic, violent ICE raid went down at a very popular Italian restaurant. And people all over the country saw the viral videos of this, and you were there and you witnessed it of what happened. So it would be good to just give people a sense of what did happen that day. What did you witness, and how did you feel when all of this went down?
Thank you, Luna, for having me on the show. When I arrived, the ICE operation was already in progress. When I arrived, I was able to quickly identify that, in fact, it was an ICE operation led by Homeland Security Investigations, which is the investigative arm of ICE. I wasn't initially permitted to enter the public sidewalk on the street where the restaurant is located, where the ICE agents were conducting their operation. So I went around the block, and at that point was able to ascertain that there were a number of community members that were probably people that had been at the restaurant, other neighbors who were out and were responding to the commotion of having about a dozen or so, probably more vehicles, government vehicles on scene, and probably between 30 and 40 agents, some that were dressed in more of a militaristic style, others that had jackets that indicated that they were members of HSI, and also detention officers. These were private detention officers that were on site. And what I saw was that the workers were sitting inside the restaurant while federal agents were walking around. And I saw one of the agents had plastic zip ties tied to his belt. So I assumed that probably the people that were working there had been zip tied. And this, in fact, had been confirmed afterwards.
Now, when you saw those zip ties and you saw this raid going down, what was the community's response to all of this, including patrons in the restaurant, patrons in the restaurants next door, and even people living in the neighborhood?
Yeah, there were probably maybe around 20 or 30 people immediately surrounding the vicinity of the restaurant that were probably neighbors, probably people that were patrons at the restaurant, and then observers from other restaurants. This is a street that is populated by residential buildings or homes, single-family homes, but also restaurants and other types of businesses that was quite active on a Friday evening at 4:30 during a time where people were going out to dinner, maybe celebrating their graduation ceremonies and things of that nature, people walking their pets, children walking with their parents. And so it was a quite busy early evening, late afternoon. And there were some people that were challenging the ICE agents by saying things to them, primarily centered around leaving their neighborhood, challenged them to remove their face masks or the items that were covering their faces, and as well as people that were family members. I was standing next to a young woman whose father was a worker who was inside the restaurant, and she was in distress, did not know what was going to happen. And at that point, I had observed at least two people that were brought out of the restaurant through a side door and were being handcuffed, not only handcuffed around the wrist, but also chained down to their ankles, and were being placed into one of the private vans that was run by these detention officers. I was surprised by what I saw. First and foremost, because it did seem that a lot of the people that were responding were people from that community, people from that neighborhood. I saw, at least on a couple of occasions, two older women that were wearing like sundresses and seemed to have been at a restaurant somewhere, who were challenging and yelling at the ICE agents and being very forceful in their words of saying, "You don't belong here." And that was important to see because I think what it represented then was this generalized rejection that a federal agency should come to a community with so much force, with so much military style gear, in order to detain hardworking people who are a part of their neighborhood because they work there. And that was impressive to see. I saw a father who was holding his toddler and pointing to the agents and yelling at them to get out. And so what I saw in that moment was his father saying, "How dare you come to my community and place everyone at risk with the type of militaristic response that you have," and holding his child and saying, "This is for my children."
We at the Revolution Nothing Less show have identified that this is a fascist regime. And I know earlier you were describing how their tactics and people who were on the ground were calling these ICE agents fascists. I'm wondering, how are you seeing this? You're describing the tearing up the rule of law, ripping away and trampling on people's basic rights. How are you making the comparisons to say something like Nazi Germany of what Hitler did to the Jewish people historically and what he's doing to immigrants?
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of comparisons there, especially if you look at or analyze the words of Stephen Miller prior to Trump being elected. The electoral campaign moving forward, analyzing the words of not only going after people that were undocumented, but Stephen Miller specifically saying that he was going to target quote unquote, legal migrants. And we see that with the potential that over 1 million people could have their status changed because they are on a temporary protected status or have been paroled into the United States. So from one day to the next, about 1 million people could suddenly find themselves without status. And they were the ones that were, I hate to frame it this way, but this is the way the government frames it, did it the right way. Right. They're the ones that either used the application that Biden was pushing for and entered the port of entry and had their appointments. And now we're going to court. And now what we're seeing in immigration court is that people go to court. And as soon as they walk out of court, they're being detained by ICE agents and being placed on expedited removal because due process rights no longer apply in the same way. And so the steps that are being taken can be compared to authoritarian regimes historically and also in the present tense. And we see that with some authoritarian governments around the world today, where the Trump regime, especially through its Project 2025 roadmap, seems to mirror, if not adopt, many of the same steps that other authoritarian regimes, fascistic in nature, are attempting to control and consolidate power within one single branch of government.
Mm-hmm.
Horrible! Get inside, get inside, get inside, get inside, get inside. Get inside.
I'm a community advocate, and I got involved on Saturday when I learned that the ICE raid had taken place here and how dangerous it had been for the community and just how scary it is for so many of us here. So I knew I had to get involved. But basically what happened was there was an illegal ICE raid here, and it was an act of terrorism against our community.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to see this happening in your own neighborhoods and in places where you've eaten, where you've, met, or maybe some people, know people very well who work here. And there are people who come here every week or multiple times a week, These are our neighbors, and a lot of them live right here in the community. But this is just a beloved little neighborhood restaurant. This is a small community right outside of downtown San Diego, but it's very neighborhoody and a lot of old homes and narrow streets. And these are just people working in a restaurant. They stormed the restaurant, forced their way in, threw a manager against a wall, cuffed everybody. Everybody in this restaurant was detained. Everybody in this restaurant was arrested. And many of them were born here. Many of them, there's never been any question about their citizenship status whatsoever. But every person was apparently forced to identify themselves. And what I understand is that there were 4 people who either didn't have identification or they just didn't have their immigration papers. I'm not clear on which. But either way, they were at work and without whatever identification was being demanded of them. And for that reason alone, they were taken away. This could really happen to anybody. This could happen to me. And this could happen to anybody's mom, anybody's child. It's happening to high school students. It's happening to little kids. And can you imagine expecting a toddler to go through immigration court, and yet they're doing this? The ones that are getting hearings, they're still not fair hearings. Yeah, this is a problem. The due process thing is huge because any of us could get picked up at this point in time. And whether it's ICE or whether it's some other law enforcement agency and they're accusing you of some crime or whatever, whether you've committed the crime or not, you don't know that you're going to get due process because we legitimately know that people are not getting due process. So who's to say you're not the next one? Who's to say it's not me?
Right.
You know, that's a threat to all of us. That's a threat to every person within this nation. So if you're not alarmed already, if you haven't seen your line, you haven't been able to say, okay, this I can't allow yet, this should probably be it. Yeah.
Hey, how you doing? My name is Arthur Mason Jr. I'm from San Diego. I don't live here currently. I'm just here visiting, dying for my daughter's graduation. But even back home in North Carolina, ICE has been doing like serious things. I got one of my clients came into my shop and she was like upset because she got to raise her nieces and nephews because they went into the factory where her sister and her husband worked at, and they snatched them up, and they didn't come home to their kids. And now she raising 3 kids that's not hers, her nieces and nephews, and the mama and daddy never came home. I just want to say that, man, that's messed up.
What do you?
These are people. These are people just like you and me.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Think about that, man. They snatching people up. They got families. They got to go handle to. Let that sink in.
Yeah.
Sure.
We opened today's show with the voice of the revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian. And now we want to go to a segment of an interview that was done with him in 2022. Heart and Soul and Hardcore for Revolution. You can watch the interview in full on this channel. Now, this interview took place just months after a whole series of vicious attacks were hurled at Bob Avakian. And in this answer, he speaks to how where these attacks come from and what he thinks about them. Now, what he's responding to is a series of attacks that were launched on him in the aftermath of an effort that was led by Sunsara Taylor, uniting together with other people to prevent the overturning of Roe v. Wade, of the right to abortion. And she formed a group called Rise Up for Abortion Rights together with others. And the day after Roe v. Wade was overturned, instead of getting into the streets and joining in mass protest and outrage, a cabal, a group of these counter-revolutionary haters launched an attack on Rise Up for Abortion Rights. And it was directed at Sunsara Taylor. And it was directed in very ugly and unprincipled ways at Bob Avakian. And we wanted to play this because it's important in its own right, and because these attacks, especially at a moment of such urgent stakes for the people of the world, are increasing and getting more venomous. So let's watch how Bob Avakian answers what he thinks of these.
On our website, revcom.us, we have a very important statement that makes the point that you are deeply loved by people here and people all over the world for the very same reason that you are viciously hated. You are the foremost revolutionary leader and thinker in the world today, and you are fighting for and you concentrate the most radical rupture with the way the world is currently organized and structured and all the ways that people relate and think that are bound up with the way the world currently is. And recently there's been an upsurge of attacks on you, really ugly, degrading, some of them very depraved and quite dangerous. There are also very important statements of love and support that we've been publishing at revcom.us. So what I was hoping you could talk about, to the degree you're willing to share this, is on a personal level. How do you carry both of those things, both the level of responsibility that you have taken for this revolution and living with that level of hostility aimed at you?
Well, I'd like to say it never bothers me personally. I like to say I never say, fuck all these motherfuckers, But, then I have to come back, to the science again. Like, why, first of all, let me say I deeply appreciate all the love and support. That's one thing I do want to say. But in terms of the opposite, in terms of these, attacks, you have to go back to the science again. Why do people hate me? They don't know me, personally. They never interacted with me personally. I mean, maybe a few have, but overwhelmingly, all these people out there doing this, they don't know me personally. They hate me because of what I stand for, what I'm working for, which is an actual revolution. That's the fundamental reason why why you get all this vitriol, all these poisonous attacks, because actually the revolution is in the interest of the great masses of people. But at any given time, some people may not, even people whose interests do lie with revolution, don't recognize that. And then there are other people who have a stake in not having a revolution. There's people whose political programs are based on carving out a niche for themselves within the system or going for petty reforms. And there's two things that what we're doing, working for a revolution, at least two, that get in the way of that and mess it up for them. One, it points out that you actually are not going to be able to solve these problems by going for these petty reforms. So it establishes the contrast there. And the other thing is, closely related to that, is it undermines their efforts, to work for reforms that actually end up reinforcing this system and keeping people chained to it. Because here you are, you're out there and you're scientifically showing we need a revolution, and then that shines a light on what these people are aiming for, and it shows how petty and paltry it is. And if you're deeply invested in what are these social democrats? They want the U.S. to be like Sweden, which just elected a reactionary government. That's the highest, that's the best you can think. Just a detour for a second. Why is this happening in Sweden? Because they had all this nice social democracy going. Yes, they're not a major imperialist, exploiter, but they are in on the whole imperialist system. They're sharing in the overall loot that this whole Western imperialism in particular is accumulating off of all this vicious exploitation in the world. So this enabled them, with their relatively small populations and isolated from some of the main arenas in the world, to have all these social programs, welfare programs and so on. And they had a certain, culture that went along with that. Now all of a sudden, because of what imperialism is doing in the world, both the wars it's fomenting and backing and causing to go in certain directions, and just the operation of the system and the way it's uprooting people, has caused a lot of immigrants to come into a place like Sweden. And now all of a sudden these immigrants bring with them a different culture, and now this very liberal exterior is breaking down. And you got some of this fascist impulses, like in this country. We're a secular people, or we're people who don't wear our religion on our sleeves, blah blah blah. And all these other people come in here from these different cultures and so on, and they're going to undermine our whole beautiful thing we got going here. So let's vote for a fascist. So is this your model, people of social democracy? Is this the highest you can imagine? Getting some. First of all, this is not Sweden. This is the biggest oppressor and plunderer of people in the environment in the entire world. If you don't believe it, go to revcom.us, and we show it every day. You can go on the website, and we've proven it many times over with actual scientific analysis, facts, and evidence. This is not little old Sweden. This is the most powerful imperialist, and has been for decades, most powerful imperialist oppressor in the world. So when you call all that out and say we need to get rid of this whole thing, you are disrupting the whole attempt at posing as socialist. One of these people that have made this attack on Rise Up and on you and on me, we're intersectional socialists, whatever, What the fuck are you talking about? This it has nothing to do with actually ending all, so-called intersectionality has nothing. You see, there's a statement interview I did which said that intersectionality fails to understand, and this is fundamental, that it's the system of capitalism, imperialism, its mode of production, its economic system at the foundation that sets the terms for things all over the world at this point, including in this country, but also in countries like Sweden or in countries like Bangladesh or in countries like Angola. You know, if you don't understand what all this is rooted in, you can say you want to try to find the ways to merge and link up these different struggles, but they're going to be set against each other because you aren't getting to the root of things. If you don't get to the root of things, you don't see the way in which the operation of the system itself sets people against each other. You know, you can go into these different countries in Africa, for example. Why do you have all these civil wars? You know, where millions of people have died in the Congo, for example. Well, go back and look at the history of imperialism in the Congo. You go back, 60 years to when the popular nationalist Lumumba was coming forward as a leader, and the U.S. and British and Western imperialists got rid of him, murdered him. And they put in a brutal government that ruled, and brutalized the people for decades while, being a handmaiden, being an accomplice and a facilitator of U.S. imperialism. And all, what happens? So think back to the experience of the Lakota people, the Sioux in this country. They're supposed to get the Black Hills. That was one of the treaties that was signed. It was sacred to them. And then they discovered gold and other precious minerals. Out you go. You get driven out. Well, this is what happens all over the world. All of a sudden, you're in an African country and they discover a precious mineral. Well, then the imperialists contend over who's going to get control of that mineral or that oil or whatever it is. And then they back opposing forces, taking advantage of contradictions among the people, that exist. And, this is why you get these things in the Congo, or why you got the terrible thing in Rwanda, whatever. You can go all around the world. It's the same thing. So if you're not really going after the imperialist system, if you're not going after what all this is rooted in and what's setting the terms for everything, you're not going to be able to link up the struggles of the people. People are going to be manipulated and turned against each other unless we get to the root cause of this and uproot it and overthrow it. So this is what we're putting forward. And then, look, we did not adopt a revolutionary program in order to embarrass social democrats. We did not adopt a revolutionary program in order to show how paltry all this woke stuff is. We adopted a revolutionary program because of a scientific analysis of where all these horrors are rooted in and what's necessary to get rid of them. But then this shines a big light insofar as it gets out in the world on all the absolute poverty of these other programs. And plus, if you start winning people to this, then it takes away some of their capital. You're winning people to this instead of people, being part of their thing, and then they can't go to the NGO and say, we got a lot of people, so we need a lot of money, and so on and so on and so on. This is why they hate us, and this is why they hate me, as a concentration of this. And, so I have to, get up in the morning and go, fuck all you motherfuckers. And then I have to say, okay, let's step back and remember what this is about. This is not about you. They're only hating you because you're doing what needs to be done to shine a light on all this and to struggle with people about what's the way forward out of it. That's why they hate you. So, you can't just, I'm not going to pretend it doesn't bother me, but you have to rise above that. And this applies to everybody, because everybody who's part of this is going to get attacked in various ways, in very nasty ways. You have to rise above that because of what it's about. And why are you doing what you're doing in the first place? That's the reason you have to rise above it. And it's not we should let these attacks go unanswered, and we're not. But we have to remember, what's the real content of this? Why is this actually happening? What is it they really hate? And therefore, how do we respond? We respond on the basis of continuing to work for what it is that they hate. Not because they hate it, but because it's what needs to happen. And they hate it because it's what needs to happen, and they don't want to go there. Because it requires sacrifice. I mean, this is a minor sacrifice. I'm sure there are going to be much more scurrilous attacks as we go forward, especially as we gather in, forces for this revolution. It's going to go to a whole other level. It's going to be in the gutter in a whole different way. But that's part of the process. Again, we don't let these attacks go unanswered because it's important that people understand where they're coming from and what's the reality out here that, is the basis for these attacks and what we're about and why we're being attacked because we're about what we're about. But this is a minor thing compared to the sacrifices that are going to be required. And as I've said, this is not some bunch of monks, whipping themselves, to get themselves right with God and to try to purge their sins. This is not some kind of religious-oriented sacrifice. God forbid. This is, not about cultism, much as they like to say that. It's about the emancipation of humanity. The point is not to sacrifice. That's not the goal. The goal is to win, to make revolution. But that's going to require sacrifice, and we have to be ready, oriented toward making those sacrifices in order to get where we need to go, in order to bring forward the masses of people who see that we're serious about this. It's not that, come and attack us so we can show we're serious, but, but understanding we're going to be attacked, but more than that, understanding that we have to, you have to go through hell to make a better world, given what you're up against. And it's not that, we're hungering to go through hell, but we're willing to do it because of what is at stake for the masses of humanity who are suffering so terribly and so unnecessarily, and ultimately for humanity as a whole and its very future. So that's how I look at that.
So again, that interview was from 2022. Up close and personal with Bob Avakian, heart and soul and hardcore for revolution. And you can watch the full thing on our channel. It's a 3-part interview. It's deep. Go watch it, spread it. And we want to take a minute because these attacks are coming. They're ugly. They're, widespread. What do we think of this bullshit? And how do we respond to how Bob Avakian answers this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just appreciating rewatching that because you get a sense of who this leader is, as opposed to all of the ugly, low-level gutter stuff that are just said about him. You get a sense of of both, why are we even doing what we're doing? He keeps coming back and he keeps bringing us for the emancipation of humanity, And I think a lot of the times, when we're kind of, he said that, right? The people that are joining, that are being part of, this movement for revolution, you're going to get hit with these attacks, And a lot of the times I know, people even around the RevCom Corps that have actually said, a lot of the times I do feel like, well, am I crazy? Because everybody else is kind of not, or either just attacking or not with it, And then you end up, kind of, thinking, oh, well, everybody's saying all this cult, everybody's saying all this, garbage. And then you kind of whoa, why is this happening? And I just think there is everything that Bob Avakian is actually walking through about what do we actually represent? Even the RevCom Corps for the emancipation of humanity versus what? People that are actually trying to, prey on the ways of thinking that people are, that are out there in society, where people are asking the wrong questions about people are just so kind of pulled and, and go along with all of this tabloid culture and bullshit instead of actually what's the content of what is the content of the decades long work that Bob Avakian has done on the questions of liberating, humanity from this vicious monstrosity of a system of capitalism, imperialism. Why not ask those questions and engage that content and debate and discuss out those, make a position. If you don't think that what we're saying is correct, then argue it out, but not any of this low level kind of garbage, And I think, to continue to actually bring us back to those questions. Why are we actually, why has Bob Avakian continued to fight for and never given up on revolution? Like, why not go to those questions and actually engage what he is actually seeing about the need and the possibility, including in this time, to make a real revolution?
Yeah, there's there's a bunch of points you're making I really agree with, but I also want to, just in line with a point you just made, call people's attention to an article that's on revcom.us this week that is an answer. It's titled "A Typically Crude Attack on Bob Avakian and the Revcoms and the Critical Need for Higher Standards and Principled Methods." And it's a response to this, tabloid style, gutter level attack on BA and the Revcoms in a significant literary publication, N+1, by this woman, Hannah Zevin. And it's just, it's low level, it's personal lived experience. It's full of lies. It's full of falsehoods and inaccuracies. But part of her argument is, well, this must be a cult because for decades, Bob Avakian has never given up on revolution. That's crazy. And meanwhile, what's rational is making your peace with this system. But exactly, instead of answering the questions, instead of engaging the content of Bob Avakian's work, instead of making an argument for why revolution is not desirable or possible, the argument is, well, obviously, that's insane. That's off the table. And it does great harm.
Yeah. And I think that is exactly to this something that somebody that's been working closely with the Revcom Corps mentioned to me about, just off of like engaging Bob Avakian on these questions, or watching that, what we all just watched together, right? Reading some of the articles where Bob Avakian is speaking to this question of cult, that she was kind of saying, well, there's no need, he's not defensive on this question. He's responding. He's, actually putting forward what he thinks on this, and responding to these attacks, and taking on these attacks. We should have no ounce of defensiveness. And that's exactly to this point, is what we should be defensive in the face of people giving up on revolution, putting forward that we need to accept the way things are and just live with it. Because, and instead of actually being proud to like call Bob Avakian our own, who has never given up on revolution and has brought forward an actual, strategy, an analysis of the moment that we're living in, and has not, in this time, giving real-time leadership. Why should we be defensive in the face of that? Why should we accept any of, just the bullshit that's out there about Bob Avakian?
Yeah, there's one point in what you're making that I want to pick up on, which is the question of how people think. Because this idea, well, everyone says it, therefore it must be true, it does great harm. And it's not how you determine reality. It's not how you discern what's true. For a long time, everyone knew the earth was flat. It is not. And it did not make it true because everyone thought it. And in the world right now, what people absolutely urgently have to do is go for the evidence of something. Go for the actual hardcore, what is objectively true. And you have to do some work. So don't go by what everybody says. Go by what Bob Avakian is actually saying. Dig into it for yourself. And with critical thinking, decide, well, do I think revolution is necessary? Possible? How to defeat this fascism? He's got social media messages, a body of work that is a tremendous gift to humanity, exactly like you're talking about. Care enough to dig into the actual substance of it and not by what everybody says, which is an unscientific, anti-scientific way to think. And it does great harm.
Yeah. And I think one more thing that just has to be said about these dangerous slanders, low-level garbage that's being said about Bob Avakian and the Revcoms is what has to be fought for to be the principles of the movement, including the fight against, what we're confronting with this fascist regime, is if you have an actual difference with substance, good, let's debate it out. We'll all learn in that process, but all this gossip, low level, garbage that said, name calling is not acceptable, and it only serves the state, it only serves the pigs, and it only serves this divide and conquer bullshit. And so, so when we're out in the streets, when we're out actually, uniting all who can be united, standing shoulder to shoulder with people that, are fighting against this fascism, when you start hearing cult, call it out, and actually, challenge people. If you have an actual substantive, difference, then let's talk about it. Let's engage, let's debate and let's discuss that. But none of this harmful bullshit that's just gonna, divide the movement.
Yeah. And a challenge for people who are checking this out themselves and hearing all this, when somebody says, it's a cult, ask them what they've actually read about Bob Avakian, and then you'll see who's the real cult member, the unthinking shutdown debate, accusations of cult, or the people who are critically minded and engaging the substance of the world and the urgent need to change the world. So with that, we want to invite people to be part of the campaign going on the offensive with Bob Avakian's work, raising people's sights and unleashing their visions and dreams of a whole different world, spreading Avakian's social media messages throughout society. We are raising $30,000 by July 1st to get Avakian's work in a big way throughout all of society. So make a donation. Let's change the tide, change the culture, change the modes of thinking, all as part of bringing into being a whole different world. Write to us at info@BobAvakianOfficialEverywhere.org and make a donation. And we'll talk more about that next week as well. The forced starvation, the ethnic cleansing, the indiscriminate bombing in Gaza by Israel with full U.S. backing continues. This is a genocide, and it is a war on children. Over 90 days. That's how long Israel, with backing from Trump and his fascist regime, have blockaded all food, water, fuel, medicine from entering Gaza. Last week, the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is an Israeli and U.S.-run organization, opened a few sites for distributing food. But it was immediately clear its aim was never to end acute hunger in Gaza. There have been repeated Israeli massacres at these sites. After walking for miles, after waiting in line for hours, the Israeli army shot indiscriminately into the crowds of children, of mothers, of fathers, desperately hungry, killed by the dozens and hundreds wounded for trying to get a few morsels of food.
The grief for these young sisters is unbearable. Their father was among 5 killed when they attempted to get near an aid distribution center in southern Gaza, according to doctors. My dad went to get food for us, but he was shot, and then he died. Israel has denied responsibility, saying it had only fired warning shots. The killings follow what doctors working at Gaza's Nasser hospital have called a mass casualty event. On Sunday, the Gaza Ministry of Health said over 50 Palestinians were killed and at least 200 wounded when they tried to reach an aid distribution center run by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. This early morning cell phone video appears to show the moment gunfire first erupted. The bodies of those killed and injured can be seen lying on the sand as the sun rose. GHF, which is backed by Israel and the U.S., is staffed with armed American private contractors.
This is a nightmare that no one can stand aside from. There is no neutral. Watch what Dr. Feroz Sidwa said about the psychiatric devastation on the children in Gaza.
And then the psychiatric devastation that children are facing is absolutely unprecedented, I suspect, in all of world history. The War Child Alliance, and I mentioned this during the Security Council meeting, the War Child Alliance has put out a report showing that almost half of Gaza's children are suicidal. That's completely I've never seen anything like that in any of the conflict zones I've ever worked in. And 90, I think it was 96% of Gaza's children expect to die in this war. That's just outrageous. So the situation for children is that they're not allowed to be children anymore, honestly.
Just think about that. Almost half of Gaza's children are suicidal, and 96% expect to die. Gaza, a place where the U.S. and where Israel have prevented the children from being children. An article on revcom.us speaks to the urgent need for mass protest to demand a stop to the U.S.-Israeli genocide of the Palestinian people, an end to the siege on Gaza, and linking it to the demand that the Trump fascist regime must go now. The article calls on all those who stood up bravely last spring against the complicity of their universities in this genocide, all those who've continued to stand up and demand this nightmare stop at serious personal risk, to all of you who continue to lose sleep because of this horror, but who don't know what to do. You are needed now. You are needed back in the streets, back into the fight against this genocide, and doing so while making links to the fight to unite all who can be united to defeat this American fascism, lest the space for this protest be no more. Don't just agonize over the images of burnt children and hang your head in helplessness. Don't turn away from the videos of the starving people. But also don't let your rage turn to bitterness, turn to hopelessness, and then passivity. And don't stand aside out of personal fear. Let your anger drive you to go deeper, to understand, what are we facing? Why does this keep happening? What is part of? And what will it take to stop it? And act together with others on this understanding. Have each other's backs with collective self-sacrifice and courage. Join in principled debate and discussion about the source of all this and the fundamental solution to the needless suffering that's being visited on the people of Gaza, the people of the US, and people all over the world. And if you don't act while the horrors multiply, if you don't speak out and demand this stop, then you are complicit. Listen to the challenge from the environmental and social justice activist Greta Thunberg as she boarded a boat as part of the Freedom Flotilla Coalition aimed at breaking the siege on Gaza.
No matter what odds we are against, we have to keep trying, because the moment we stop trying is when we lose our humanity. And no matter how dangerous this mission is, it is nowhere near as dangerous as the silence of the entire world in the face of a live-streamed genocide.
Follow more about the Freedom Flotilla on Instagram and learn from their courage and their call to action. In the face of heightened horror, in the face of greater repression, nonviolent but massive and unrelenting protests need to grow broader, deeper, and more determined. See you in the streets to demand this nightmare stop. So this brings us to the end of today's show. Michelle, I've been so glad you've been able to co-host with me today. We have a special treat for people who are Patreons. And if you hurry fast and become a Patreon, we are going to release the full-length sections of the interviews that were done with the people in San Diego, with the person from the American Friends Service Committee. So become a Patreon and we'll release those full-length interviews to you as a special thank you and a gift. And even more, you'll be able to support this show in its urgent mission to spread the need, the understanding for revolution, nothing less.
We want to thank the Revolution Nothing Less crew. Like, subscribe, share this show, and leave a comment below.
Hit the notification bell and be here next week for a whole different world.